Several years ago, I would have described myself as unaware and even indifferent to the issue of pornography. And I certainly would have balked at anyone that would have suggested this would become my central focus of my professional and clinical work. That would have been a very strange and bizarre concept to me several years ago. But all of this changed, however, when as a young marriage and family therapist, I began working in the trenches with real-life people that are impacted by this issue. I witnessed firsthand the dramatic increase in the number of marriages and families being impacted by pornography, and saw how the direct and indirect influence of pornography was altering women's realities on many levels. The more skilled I became in asking systemic questions about pornography's influence, the more I learned how pervasive it was and is. And I became deeply curious and concerned about the overwhelmingly harmful effects. Through study and research, I found some answers to my initial wonderings, but mostly I've discovered new questions and have clarified new questions for myself and my work. For example, I would like to know why it is that pornography has become such a driving cultural force at the very time when men and women have unprecedented opportunity to develop partnerships based on equality and personal growth. Are we witnessing a backlash to feminism and female assertion? Are these signs of societal regression, sexual immaturity, or moral failing? Or is it a sexual agenda intended to keep the consumer index alive and well by fostering estrangement and discontent between the sexes? I don't know the answers to these questions, but I do know the current phenomenon goes far beyond the advent of the internet, which is commonly pinned as the culprit. In being asked to address the impact of pornography on women, I feel a great responsibility to represent well the hundreds of stories that women have shared with me. Their stories are diverse and complex. They span a variety of backgrounds, roles, socioeconomic groups, and sadly, all age groups. I have worked with women from age 5 to age 75. Women and girls have shared their personal narratives with me about why they love pornography and hate pornography, how they've been victimized by it or have felt ownership through their lives through it. They have shared how they've been devastated by a family member's use of it, what it felt like to be used in the production of it, how difficult it is to find a man to date who isn't into porn, and how scary it is to raise children in a sexualized society. As the themes in these stories point out, women can no longer be categorically described as the victimized, the consumed, and the objectified, because today women are also the objectifiers, the producers, and the consumers of pornography. And for this reason, it is a challenge to address the impact on women in a concise, cohesive manner. So in the interest of time, I will highlight the impacts I know best, the ones I have worked with in an up-close and personal way in therapy rooms in Canada and in the United States. These impacts include the impact on adolescent females, female consumers, and wives of consumers. The first area, adolescent females. If we examine the social and cultural context of today's female teens and tweens, one of my new favorite words, we find a high-tech world with unprecedented opportunity for them to connect and to learn. But we also find a cultural and social landscape that is arguably more sexually explicit and aggressive than that of past eras. Now, if by sexually explicit we meant sexually honest, open, respectful, we would likely not be gathered here today. Or in fact, we may be gathered calling for more explicitness. But sadly, sexual explicitness in the teen world too often refers to hardcore pornographic content that research has shown to be, quote, very intrusive and unwanted by many teens. A teen today can access hardcore material that 15 years ago, a seasoned purveyor of pornography would have had a hard time to acquire. As a retired FBI agent who worked in the area of obscenity once shared with me, the worst of the worst is online. I fear we are becoming so desensitized to minors being exposed to pornography that we forget it is illegal to distribute and knowingly expose minors to it. And I question how collectively as a society we are enabling that. We have also bought into this idea that having non-consumers and citizens, as well as institutions, pay for, continually upgrade, and continually monitor filtering is a solution, as opposed to having consumers pay for and be taxed to subscribe to access to an internet port, not a domain, that is reserved for legal content and inaccessible to the general public and public square. How this reverse logic and practice came into widespread acceptance is, in my opinion, an example of the sexual industrialized complex at work. When discussing the impact of pornography on adolescents, it is only fair to acknowledge there is a great deal we simply do not know. This is ethically tricky research to conduct. However, a growing body of research is bringing to light how influential and pervasive this material is for young adults. For example, we know from research that early exposures to pornography leave a lasting and mostly negative impression, with females reporting more negative impressions than males. We also know that when males and females are exposed to a sexualized media environment, they are more likely to have stronger notions of women as objects, and that this association is particularly strong with audiovisual formats, which is interesting because we know that teenagers have the most access through television and internet, and those are the most powerful in shaping their attitudes and beliefs. As well, we know that pornography consumption nurtures a host of beliefs and high-risk behaviors that can hinder and stable couple and family formation. We commonly hear about a minor's exposure to pornography as problematic because they are not developmentally mature enough to process it. But let me ask you, when is a human being ready to process a rape scene, torture, bestiality, incest, child pornography? And if a human being could, would we want to live in a world where that was commonplace, for people to accept that and process it and just move on? Dr. Patricia Greenfield, a researcher in the Department of Psychology at UCLA, concluded in one of her research articles, quote, "We often consider the internet to be a repository of information. We had better also think of the internet in terms of the values we wish to socialize," end quote. As a clinician, I have grown increasingly concerned about how internet pornography has become a powerful and even primary socializing agent for youth. It affects everything from how they language and frame sexuality, to how they relate to and treat their own bodies, to where and why they pierce and tattoo certain body parts, to what they expect in relationships and the world around them. I am also witnessing more female adolescents tolerating abuse in dating relationships, that is, if they even recognize it as abuse in the first place, looking at or producing pornography themselves so their boyfriends will think they are open and cool, healthy young women wanting cosmetic surgery to alter and manipulate healthy breast tissue and labia, to conform to a ridiculously narrow definition of sexy that's one-dimensional, as well as normalizing sexual abuse done to them because they see the same acts eroticized in pornography. After all, how bad can it be when the larger culture around you finds abuse a turn-on. While there are many who argue pornography provides a safe educational outlet for curious youth, my experience has taught me otherwise. Teens who consume pornography regularly have distorted, narcissistic, self-absorbed views about sex. They tend to be more anxious in relationships because of the unrealistic expectations they place on themselves and their partners. And they are more cynical about love, not to mention at risk for developing compulsive sexual behaviors, which we know are a guaranteed killjoy. Like many of you, I believe every young person deserves the best chances possible of receiving accurate information about healthy sexuality and relationships, including the risks associated with pornography. When I've done work with teens and I share with them research-based information, they think I'm lying to them because they've never heard this information before. I have come to view pornography as a major stumbling block in healthy development of young adults, and would support efforts to restructure the internet, as well as more rigorous enforcement of existing laws and widespread public education. The second area of impact I would like to address is the impact on female consumers of pornography. This is a population often overlooked by researchers and discussants, which in and of itself reflects some of the cultural stereotypes and assumptions that we often make about female sexuality. Because we often have an assumption of purity regarding females, it has been my experience that when a female initiates therapy for compulsive pornography use or masturbation, she is often more severe than her male counterparts because she has delayed and procrastinated treatment because of the shame related to her gender and that issue. Although men are almost 6.5 times more likely to use internet pornography, females consistently, we find, represent approximately 30% of internet pornography consumers, a third, essentially. Female consumption is further supported by a very recent study published earlier this winter of over 800 college-age students representing 6 different campuses across the states. They found 31% of the young women reported using pornography, and almost half of the women reported that viewing pornography was acceptable to them. Putting this into perspective, what this means is that females today, the emerging adult population, is more accepting of pornography than their fathers were just one generation ago. Another key finding in this same study, the Generation XXX study by Dr. Jason Carroll, was that the acceptance of pornography was more strongly correlated to permissive sexuality, alcohol and drug use, binge drinking, and cigarette smoking than was actual porn use. What I take from this finding is that female attitudes about pornography matter just as much as their usage. Although gender differences exist in the way pornography is consumed, I have witnessed more similarities than differences in the effects. For example, many of the female consumers I have worked with therapeutically have become desensitized to graphic material. They have difficulty forming long-term relationships with men. They have less sensitivity towards males and take greater risks with their sexual health. As well, because so many female consumers also have histories of sexual trauma, there is a neurotic dimension to the consumption that makes healing harder on all fronts. Although many would like to think of female consumption as helping women to be more sexually confident and secure, my clinical observations, along with those of many of my colleagues, are finding the opposite. And the long-term ramifications of having generations of mothers and women increasingly accepting of material that does harm to women at large is definitely worthy of our attention. Lastly, I would like to address the impact on wives of pornography consumers. Virginia Woolf once said, quote, "It is far more difficult to murder a phantom than a reality," end quote. In working with wives of pornography users, I have come to understand the truth in that statement. Instead of the traditional other woman, or heaven forbid, women, the spouse of a pornography user is betrayed with hundreds, if not thousands, of fantasy images that invite her into thinking she doesn't measure up. Even though his pornography use has far more to do with seeking a quick fix, mood-altering experience than it has anything to do with her sexuality or with her as a woman. The discovery of this problem in a marriage is uniquely devastating, evoking an intense range of emotions. In fact, research supports that this is just as painful, if not more so, than a traditional affair. Hence, it's not surprising we are seeing an increase in divorces relating to this issue. To understand the psychological, spiritual, and relational harm pornography use evokes, we must keep the cultural context in mind for these women. North American women, which I include myself as a part of, being from Canada, are socialized to seek after, if not expect, marital and intimate relationships that are based on equality and partnerships founded upon mutual respect, honesty, shared power, and romantic love versus family arrangement. In stark contrast, pornography promotes and eroticizes power imbalances, discrimination, disrespect, abuse, voyeurism, objectification, and detachment, all of which represent the antitheses of marital ideals for Western women. Consequently, when a North American woman discovers that her spouse is using and viewing pornography secretly, it is not only devastating to her sense of self as a woman and her sense of trust, but it can threaten the very foundation upon which she has constructed her relational world, not just with her spouse, but the larger world around her. Moreover, she is suddenly confronted with how psychologically split her so-called modern man is. To add insult to injury, these women face a myriad of misconceptions and assumptions about why their husbands view pornography. Things like, she must have let herself go. If she were more sexually available, he wouldn't be turning to pornography. They must have a bad marriage. He's just more open-minded and sexually creative than her, etc., etc. It is not surprising then to discover that the majority of these women experience intense isolation due to the judgment, shame, blame, and implications of disclosure. As a result, many of these women do experience psychological and spiritual crises as they grapple with who to turn to and what to do. It has been troubling and intriguing to me how many times I encounter derogatory beliefs about this group of women. Beliefs that dismiss the magnitude of the issue and the legitimacy of it, by framing them as pathological, overreacting, and frigid women who need to lighten up. After all, he's just looking. The irony is profound. The wives who experience normal reactions, healthy reactions to betrayal and deceit on many fronts are pathologized, while the porn stars who are commonly drug addicted, sexually traumatized, and dealing with a range of psychiatric problems commonly, are simply performers who help men have a safe outlet for extramarital fantasy. Neither group of women win. When we examine the social science research pertaining to wives of pornography, the associated symptoms and risks are compelling. For example, we know that it is common for these spouses to report diminished intimacy and marital satisfaction. There is increased risk of separation and divorce. There's less sensitivity in their marriages. There's decreased sexual satisfaction and decreased sexual relations. And ironically, it's the women that tell me how angry they are that their sex life has been trampled on by the pornography. These are women that miss and are angry about that part of their life being destroyed and altered by his pornography use. There's also increased anxiety and depression and decreased temporal security due to the risk of job loss or related debts. It is not uncommon for wives of pornography users to report being asked to reenact pornography scenes, consume pornography with their partner, or be pressured or coerced into sexual acts they find uncomfortable or demeaning. Even more sinister, and I wish we had more time to explore this today, there are correlations between pornography use and marital rape, as well as battery. In closing, I wish to emphasize again there is much we do not know about the impact of pornography on women. What we do know, however, is troubling to say the least and deserves action. As the internet generation enters adulthood and marital relationships, if they can form them, it is virtually guaranteed we will see increasing numbers of women, children, and men impacted by pornography, as well as impacting pornography. My hope is that those of us here today will break the pattern described by researcher Janet Hinson-Shope, who stated, quote, "Women's experiences of pornography are dismissed as anecdotal, non-representative, and unimportant. Falling into the measurement trap, we have turned to science instead of to women for answers. While we debate it, many are coping with its unwelcome presence in their lives." Oftentimes, I will mull over or study it when I study an issue out in my mind. I will flip the question being asked. So in this instance, I've asked myself many times over the last several months, what are the benefits to women about pornography use? And I will close with my answer. I cannot identify one. Thank you.